Okay, you're new to fishing, or you've been fishing, but you're really not sure what size line you should be using. This is the video for you. I'm going to go through kind of different equipment, different baits, and different types of line so you can know kind of the range of what size lines you want to be putting onto your reel when you're going fishing. Mainly bass fishing is what we're talking about here. I'm a pro bass fisherman, been doing it for over 20 years, and that is what my experience is with. Of course, I've done other types of fishing. I've done some saltwater fishing and this and that, but I'm not an expert in those realms. But if it's in a pond and it's green and it's got a big old mouth on it, those are my people. Those are my people. I'll be honest with you. I really like big, grumpy looking fish that are green and brown too. I don't mind brown fish, they're fun, but we're gonna get you set up with the right size line. If you look back just a little bit on my YouTube channel, you can see some of the videos that I did. I did one on which type of line. So we're not gonna go on the differences between monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braided line. I did that in a previous video. You can go back and watch that. But what we're gonna talk about is the right size. Now let's start with probably the most common for recreational anglers, and that is the spinning reel. Now this is a 3000 size. They kind of have different size classes. There's 1000, 2000, 3000. There is not any kind of standard on this, but really for most of your bass fishing and most of your pond fishing, bank fishing, even out in the lakes, I mean, I'm all over the country. The 3000 is what I like. That's what I prefer. And any 2000 or a 3000 is what you're going to be fishing with most of the time for pond fishing and bass and stuff like that. So once you get the right size line, you do not want to put more. If you're putting fluorocarbon, monofilament, or braid on there on these two, you do not want to put more than about 8-pound test. I see that all the time. People get the spinning reel and then they put 12-pound monofilament on there. You know what? It's not going to cast well. It's not going to handle well. It's going to want to shoot off. The diameter's too big. It's got too much memory. Now, the big difference between fluorocarbon and monofilament, fluorocarbon is more expensive, and people want to know why. It's because the materials in fluorocarbon are more expensive, and it takes longer to extrude to make this line than it does this line. It takes longer. I've seen it come out of the machines. It's really a fascinating process. I've seen it come out of the machines, and the fluorocarbon comes out pretty slow. The monofilament comes out pretty fast. It's pretty wild. It has to go and cool at a certain rate. It's really interesting. We're not going to do it and get into all that. But the big differences between the two, so why, you're saying, okay, so this is more expensive, why would you even have fluorocarbon if it's more expensive? Fluorocarbon by nature does not absorb water. In monofilament or nylon based, that's what this is, it's a nylon based line. Monofilament and nylon based lines, they do absorb water, so you're going to get that dry rot over time. So these lines are not going to last as long. Over time, they're going to get more memory. They're going to get brittle over time, and they're going to probably stretch a little bit more. A little more forgiving, really good for early, anglers just getting into things. So it's a little more forgiving. The fluorocarbon is much more sensitive. That's the big difference between the two. It's more sensitive. It's going to last a little bit longer. It doesn't absorb that water. It's a little denser, which is where you get the sensitivity from, but that's kind of the big difference there, why some people would want to use fluorocarbon versus monofilament on a spinning reel. But then as you can see here, I've got a braid line on there, and then I've got a leader. That's a whole nother ball of wax. That's a little more advanced. If you want to get into that, you can look up some of those how to tie an FG knot. I've done those videos as well. But that braided line on there can be a really good option as well. Don't overlook braid when you're talking about spinning reels. If you're talking about braid on a spinning reel, one of these 2,000 to 3,000 size reels, we're probably going to want to stick in that 10 to 20 pound range. So I've got some different ones here. 12 is probably what I fish. 12 pound is probably what I fish the most on a spinning reel. And that goes as far as straight braid as well. Now this is the exact same braid that I used to catch an 11-pound, 2-ounce bass. 11.2 on straight braid on a spinning rod in Florida. So you can catch very big bass and get them in the boat with that 12-pound braided line. So that's what I was using on that reel, and that's what I have down here with that leader. If you do a leader, you probably want to have at least 15-20 foot leader, a little bit longer, has a lot better better deal there on that. But so with that kind of with the spinning reel, you can basically fish all of these baits that we're looking at here, with the exception of a frog. A frog, you're going to have a little harder time fishing on braid on the spinning reel. But if you do use straight braid, you want zero flex in that. You want to be able to put the hook set in them. And if you use a smaller frog, this is the kind of the normal size frog, 60. That's probably what you want to. You stick with the braid for sure. But that's really more of a bait caster thing. We'll get into that in a minute. But you can fish spinner baits, chatter baits. You can fish crankbaits. You can throw, Texas rig worms. You can do Ned rigs, all the finesse type stuff. You can do that. You can do it on straight braid if you want to, or you can do it on straight monofilament, or you can do it on straight fluorocarbon. That's what I would do if I was just starting out. But stay into those diameter ranges I told you about. I would use 6 or 8 pound test in the fluorocarbon or mono with the spinning reel, and then 12 pound is what I would recommend in the braid. It's just the best size all around for a spinning reel. So now, let's say you're a little more advanced. You want to get into the bait casters, man. I see all the pros up there. I see the Mike Iaconellis, and I see the Scott Martins and all those guys out there on the pro tour using the bait casters. Well, bait casters are more efficient for doing a lot of things. It's more of a winch. You got a lot more leverage for doing a lot of different techniques, like this with a worm, Texas rig type worm, like this, a stick worm right there, 48. But it's more efficient for casting accurately. It's easier to thumb the spool as the bait's going out there, and you can make it land a little more accurately. So there's a lot of advantages, but the thing with the bait casting reels is that it's most efficient in lines about 10 pound test and up. So if you want to throw an 8 pound test, I'm looking at this 6 or 8 pound test. I'm looking here, smaller braids. I'm looking spinning reel. If I'm going to go bigger than that, 10 pound basically or up, I'm going bait caster. That's kind of the line there. So like with this frog, I'm going to be fishing that on either 30 or 50 pound braid. There's 50 pound braid. You can absolutely put the teetotal wood to a fish when he bites it up in that slop on that frog. It's a lot of fun. You can just absolutely crush them on that. But let me show you this. This is, just a chugger or popper bait. It's an E-pop from Spro. Any kind of walk-in bait, any other topwater baits that you're going to be fishing, I really like throwing that on braid. 30 pound braid. If you're going to just pick one size braid to kind of cover a bunch of bass fishing techniques, 30 pound braid on a spinning reel, you're going to have less problems with backlashes. They're much easier to pick out with braided line. I've had experience with a few backlashes, just a few. 100. Okay, maybe more than that. A few hundred, and they're much easier to pick out with the braid. I can just tell you that right now. So it doesn't matter if you're throwing a chatterbait, a swim bait. You can even throw, a Texas rig worm. You can throw a crankbait with the braid, but I really don't like that. That's probably my least favorite for that kind of stuff. But for topwaters, frog fishing, you put your 30 pound braid on there, right here, 30 pound X plasma, anything in that 30 pound range, put it on there and forget about it. And you can just go have a good time and catch a bunch of fish. And that braid lasts for a long, long time on your reel. I've got braid on some of my reels that I've had on there for over a year. I fish all the time. Now, I'm a pro angler. That's what I do. I fish tournaments all over the country. I fish them, you know, 8 months or so out of the year. I fish a lot. I've got, I mean, that braid lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts. And the easiest way to tell if the braid needs to be replaced is if it's completely lost any coloring. If it's just kind of stark white and it's real fuzzy, probably needs to be replaced. Other than that, you're probably good to go. I mean, recreational anglers, you could put braid on a reel and probably have it last for 2 or 3 years and it'd be plenty strong. So there's that. And don't worry about the fish seeing the line, seeing that braid. Oh, it's 30-pound braid. The fish are going to see that. Don't worry about that. You really only need to worry about how it affects the action of the bait. If it affects the action of the bait, your line's probably too big, and you need to downsize a little bit. So that's just kind of a general rule. Smaller the line, the more action you're going to get on your bait. The smaller the bait, a lot of times, you know, a little Ned bait here, you don't want to fish that on more than about 10-pound test. You know, 8-pound test on a spinning rod, that's all you need to do. Drop shot, kind of the same deal. 8 or 10-pound test at the most is really most of the time as big as you need to go. When you get to putting fluorocarbon or monofilament on your bait caster, you want to get a little more advanced. You want to start throwing some more crankbaits. 12-pound test is a really good place to start. 12-pound test, you know, just like right here. That Sunline Supernatural, that's a really good monofilament. If you can't find that, if you're going to Walmart and you don't see this, this is in a lot of Walmarts, believe it or not, and then you go to, let's say, a Walmart. I'm pointing because there's a Walmart across the street from where we are. There's a Walmart over there. So if you go over there to Walmart, you can get, you know, Berkeley, Trilene, one of those monofilaments. I don't know if they still even, I think they still have XL. XL is real stretchy, but I can tell you it'll last maybe 1 year, and unless you keep it in perfect condition, you're going to have to replace it. It's going to get real coily. But that first year, it's going to act real good, but it's real stretchy and forgiving. So there's that factor of it, but you lose a lot of that sensitivity that you might get with the fluorocarbon. I've actually seen the Sniper in some of the Walmarts, but it's definitely in all the Bass Pros. It's one of the best-selling fluorocarbons out there. So if you're going to go fluorocarbon, you don't want to go super high price, but you want to get something that's good. You may want to look at the Sniper. It's kind of it's around 20 bucks, 25 bucks a spool, something like that. And you can usually spool up 2 reels. I didn't want to do a whole video on that right now, but you can put some backing, just put some cheaper line on the bottom, and then you put your fluorocarbon like the top half of the spool. So you can make this last for 2 or even 3 reels, one 200-yard spool. So that's kind of a little tip I just threw in there for you. But that, you know, starting with that 12 or even 14-pound test is what I would do on a bait caster. That's kind of like the middle of the road. You can fish most of your baits, you know, your Texas rig worms. You can definitely fish swim baits and chatterbaits, and definitely spinner baits. Now there's one of my buddies that I room with on tour, Derek Hudnall. When he is on tour, he likes throwing a spinnerbait on 12-pound test. And when he told me this, we were fishing at Lake Fork, like big fish capital of the world. You know, East Texas, big bass. I mean, there's all these 6 and 8 and 10-pound bass in there. He's throwing it on 12-pound test because he said that the spinnerbait gets a little bit deeper and it has better action. Well, he ended up catching over 20 pounds that day in his best 5 fish, so I had nothing to say other than, wow, mind blown. I've always thrown spinnerbaits on, you know, 18 or 20-pound test, something a little bit heavier. But, you know, so 12-pound is kind of the minimum there, 12, 15-pound, somewhere in that range. And if you throw 12-pound, you can throw all these little crankbaits that you can throw around the bank and catch a lot of fish. Crankbaits are a lot of fun if you're just getting into fishing. And then, like I mentioned before, topwaters and the frogs, you definitely want to go back to the braid. So that's kind of what size lines to use. If you have any other specific questions like, hey, what size line do I use for a buzzbait? 30-pound braid. Just answer that one. If you have any other questions like that, drop them down there in the comments. I'll let you know what I would recommend, and hopefully we'll get you set up with the right size line for the type of baits and the type of places that you're going to be fishing. And fishing can be more fun and more productive if you have the right size line.